Valentine's Day, a day meant for celebrating love, cherishing one another, and making lasting memories. For most people, it's the perfect occasion to express affection and indulge in the warmth of companionship. Karen, a woman in her late 20s, had always dreamed of a perfect Valentine's Day with Ethan, her boyfriend of 3 years. The day had started like any other, with a cozy dinner reservation at a quiet restaurant, a red rose placed delicately in the vase on the table, and soft romantic music playing in the background. Everything seemed picture-perfect, just as Karen had imagined. But there was something in the air, something Karen couldn't quite put her finger on. As she gazed across the table, watching Ethan carefully choose his words, she couldn't help but notice a certain distance in his eyes. He was distracted, his phone lighting up repeatedly, yet he made no effort to hide it. His fingers hovered over the screen, his expression unreadable. The phone rang again, Sophie, the name flashing on the screen like a warning she didn't yet want to face. Karen's heart skipped a beat, and a lump formed in her throat. She laughed it off, pretending not to care, but in the pit of her stomach, a nagging feeling began to grow. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The night was supposed to be about love, but here she was, filled with a sense of unease, watching her boyfriend's attention drift further and further away from her. Valentine's Day, she thought, a day meant for love, yet here I am, questioning everything. The evening carried on, but Karen's thoughts were far from the romantic dinner she'd envisioned. Every glance Ethan made toward his phone stung a little more. She tried to focus on the soft candlelight, on their shared history, the laughter they once shared during holidays like this. The memories were comforting, but in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the question, was something going on? Was he losing interest? Had their relationship already begun to fade without her realizing it? A flashback hit her like a rush of cold water. A few months earlier, Karen and Ethan were inseparable. The perfect couple, everyone said. They had gone on spontaneous road trips, made future plans, and shared dreams of starting a family together. She could still remember how their mornings always started with a kiss, how they laughed about the most mundane things, and how they used to stay up late, talking about anything and everything. The love they shared had felt unshakable, a bond that no one could break. But now, as she sat across from him, she could see the cracks forming, each unspoken word between them widening the divide. He had stopped sharing his thoughts with her, his smile was no longer as warm. It was like he had become a stranger, his mind far away, and Karen could feel it. Their connection was fading, slipping through her fingers like sand. Once, they were inseparable, the perfect couple, the voice in Karen's mind echoed, but sometimes, the truth is harder to face than the lies we tell ourselves. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks, the woman in his phone, Sophie, wasn't just an innocent friend. She was something more. Ethan's distraction wasn't just a passing moment, it was the beginning of something Karen couldn't control. The sinking feeling in her chest grew stronger. She tried to hold on, but deep down, she could feel it, this Valentine's Day wasn't going to end with the promises they had once made. This was the beginning of the end. As the evening wore on, Karen struggled to keep her composure, her eyes fixed on Ethan, who was still preoccupied with his phone. Her heart raced, and a storm of emotions flooded her mind, confusion, anger, hurt. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that she was about to lose everything. And as she looked at the man she thought she knew so well, Karen couldn't help but wonder, how long had this been going on? Had he already fallen out of love with her? And most importantly, could she ever get him back, or was the man she loved already gone? The candlelight flickered as the soft clinking of silverware echoed in the dimly lit restaurant. Karen stared across the table at Ethan, her heart heavy with suspicion. The evening was meant to be a celebration, a night filled with love, but all she could feel was the gnawing discomfort growing in the pit of her stomach. Ethan's phone buzzed on the table again, the familiar notification sound that had now become a constant source of tension. He glanced down quickly, his fingers hovering over the screen for a split second before he locked it and pushed it aside, almost too quickly to seem natural. The moment was fleeting, but Karen had caught a glimpse of the name, Sophie. She had never heard of Sophie before. And Ethan had always been so open with her about his friends, so why was he being so secretive now? Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced a smile, pretending to be absorbed in the conversation. She wasn't going to make a scene, not yet. She was patient, but the waiting was killing her. The conversation continued, but Karen's mind wasn't in it anymore. It was focused on one thing, Sophie. Who was she? Why was Ethan acting so strange? And why did he react so defensively whenever that phone lit up? Karen couldn't take it anymore. The silence between them felt like a chasm growing wider with every passing second. She set her fork down and stared at him directly, her eyes narrowing slightly. Her voice was calm, but there was a clear edge to it. Karen, who's that? Sophie? Why is she texting you this time of night? Ethan's eyes widened, his expression faltering for a moment before he masked it with a forced chuckle. Ethan, it's nothing. Just an old friend from work. But Karen wasn't buying it. The tone in his voice, the way his eyes darted away, it was too rehearsed, too practiced. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper, but her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Karen, an old friend? Really? Ethan, why are you hiding it? The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's gaze dropped to his lap, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. For the first time, Karen could see the cracks in his facade, the walls he had built so carefully between them. Voiceover, was it guilt? Was it regret? Or something more? Karen's thoughts raced. The woman, Sophie, had become a symbol of everything that felt wrong between them. There was no logical explanation for Ethan's behavior, no innocent reason for the defensiveness. The message had been something more, something deeper, and Karen wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. Karen, what's going on, Ethan? Who is she to you? And why is she messaging you like that? Ethan's gaze flickered up to meet hers. His eyes were clouded with uncertainty, and for a moment, Karen thought she saw a glimmer of something else, something darker, something distant. The man she had known, the man who once held her hand and made her laugh, was slipping away. And in his place stood someone she didn't recognize. He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping in defeat. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost as if he couldn't bear to admit it, even though he knew he had to. Ethan, Karen. Sophie, she's more than just a friend. I've been seeing her. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat, and the world seemed to shift beneath her feet. She couldn't comprehend what he was saying. It was as though the earth had been torn out from under her, and she was falling into an abyss of confusion and disbelief. Ethan, I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. I've fallen for her. Karen's heart pounded in her chest. The tears she had been holding back threatened to spill, but she refused to let them show. She had to be strong, she had to understand this, but the more she heard, the harder it became to breathe. Karen, you're in love with her. How long has this been going on, Ethan? Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. Every part of her wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers. But she was too stunned, too hurt, to do anything but listen. Ethan, it started a few months ago. I never planned for it, Karen. I never meant to hurt you. The words felt empty. The pain in Karen's chest was suffocating. This wasn't the man she had spent 3 years with. This wasn't the man who promised her forever. This was a stranger, someone who had betrayed her trust without even a second thought. Voiceover, the truth was too much for her. Her heart shattered. But Ethan's mind was made up. Karen wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand answers for why she wasn't enough. Why wasn't she enough? But instead, she just sat there, feeling like she was drowning in a sea of questions with no answers. The apartment felt colder now, the silence heavier. Karen and Ethan stood in the living room, facing each other, the weight of his betrayal hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. Karen had never imagined that something like this could happen to her, to them. She had always believed in their love, in their future. But now, she was faced with the painful reality that everything she thought she knew was a lie. She crossed her arms, trying to hold herself together, but the tears wouldn't stop. The frustration, the anger, the hurt, they all threatened to spill over. "Karen, you think I don't know what this means, Ethan? You think I don't see what you're doing?" Her voice cracked, but she wasn't going to let him off the hook. She needed to hear it all, even if it broke her in the process. She needed to know the truth. "Ethan, I didn't want this to happen, Karen. I swear I didn't. But I can't help the way I feel. Sophie makes me feel alive, like I'm seen in a way I never felt with you." Karen's world shattered with those words. She didn't know how to react, how to process what was happening. She wanted to shout at him, to scream that he had no right to throw everything they had away. But instead, she just stared at him, a cold emptiness consuming her from the inside out. "Karen, so, what now, Ethan? What does this mean for us? Are you just going to walk away from everything we've built together? Just like that?" Ethan didn't respond right away. His eyes flickered, his lips parted as if he were about to say something, but nothing came out. And that silence, more than anything, broke Karen's heart. She knew the answer, even if Ethan wouldn't say it out loud. He had already made his choice. He had already chosen Sophie. And no amount of words could change that. Voiceover, and in that moment, Karen realized something terrible. The love she had for Ethan had been swept away in a single moment of truth. It was over. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Ethan stepped closer, but Karen took a step back. She couldn't even look at him anymore. He had taken everything, her trust, her love, her future, and crushed it beneath the weight of his betrayal. She didn't know how she was supposed to feel. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. All she knew was that everything had changed, and there was no going back. The finality of it settled over her like a heavy fog, and she felt the sting of his abandonment deep in her chest. She had given him everything, and he had thrown it all away. The man she loved was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. And the worst part was, she didn't know if she could ever forgive him. The night that had started with so much hope, with the warmth of love in the air, now felt like the darkest moment of her life. And as she stood there, facing the man who had shattered her world, Karen realized one painful truth: Valentine's Day would never be the same again. The days following the confrontation with Ethan were a blur for Karen. She couldn't escape the image of him standing there, admitting his love for Sophie. The words echoed in her mind, replaying like a broken record. The deeper she tried to bury them, the more they surfaced, rising to the surface with every passing moment. What is love without trust? And once that trust is broken, can it ever be rebuilt? Karen couldn't stop asking herself this question. Love, for her, had always been about connection, about intimacy. And now, everything felt tainted. She had given Ethan everything, trusted him with her heart, her soul, and he had just ripped it all away. She paced back and forth in their apartment, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and rage. The apartment, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold, empty, as though the very walls had turned against her. Every room reminded her of something they had shared: the couch where they spent lazy Sundays, the kitchen where they cooked together, the bedroom where they made love, and now, it all felt like a lie. She grabbed her phone and stared at Ethan's contact. His name glowed brightly on the screen, but it no longer brought comfort. She knew she shouldn't text him, shouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing how badly he had hurt her, but the anger inside her was too strong. Her fingers trembled as she typed the first message, her words laced with venom. "Karen, how could you do this to me? After everything we shared, you just threw it all away. What does she have that I don't? What made you fall for her, Ethan? As soon as she hit send, regret set in. What was she doing? Why was she giving him the power to control her emotions like this? She quickly deleted the message, but the damage was done. Her emotions were raw, out of control. She felt like a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. The flashbacks came next, uninvited and relentless. She remembered the time they went on their first trip together, laughing like kids, and how Ethan held her hand at the airport, promising they'd always stick together. Then there was their anniversary dinner, where he had kissed her on the lips and whispered that he'd love her forever. She clung to these memories like a lifeline, but the more she held on to them, the more they shattered. These once beautiful moments now seemed like a cruel joke, reminders of the love she thought was real, but wasn't. Voiceover: why wasn't I enough for him? What did she have that I couldn't give? Was I too much? Or was I just not enough? Karen couldn't stop spiraling. The sadness turned to anger, and the anger turned to something darker. She spent days lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trapped in her thoughts. She kept replaying Ethan's words in her head, trying to make sense of them. He had fallen for Sophie, a woman who had taken his attention away from her, a woman who had become the reason he no longer saw Karen as the one. But why? Why had he betrayed her? Was it something Karen had done? Something she hadn't done? There were no answers, just an overwhelming sense of helplessness that gripped her like a vice. It was the fourth night after the confrontation, and Karen couldn't take it anymore. She had reached the breaking point, the moment where her pain morphed into something more dangerous. Her mind was no longer clouded by confusion and regret. Instead, it was consumed by a burning need for closure, for an answer that Ethan wasn't giving her. But now, Karen knew exactly what she needed to do. She needed to confront him again, but this time, it would be different. This time, she would make him feel what she had felt: the betrayal, the abandonment, the heartache. She sat on the couch, her fingers lightly tapping against her knee as she stared at the phone in her hand. The decision had been made. She was no longer the broken woman who had cried herself to sleep for days. No, now she was someone else, someone who had had enough of being vulnerable, of being the one who always cared, always loved. She wasn't going to let Ethan off the hook so easily. Karen, muttering to herself, "If you can love someone else more than me, then I'll make sure you never hurt me again." Her words sounded like a vow. The anger inside her burned with intensity, but it wasn't just the anger of betrayal. It was something deeper, a raw, unyielding need for control. Ethan had taken her love and thrown it away. He had taken their future and destroyed it. He had broken her, but now, she would break him. She wasn't going to beg for him back, she wasn't going to cry for him anymore. She was done with that. She would make him understand the consequences of his actions. Her fingers hovered over her phone screen as she composed her message. This time, it wasn't filled with pain. No, this message was cold, calculated. She knew exactly what she wanted him to feel. She wasn't going to plead with him, she was going to make him face the truth. Karen, typing, "We need to talk. I want you to come over, and I need you to look me in the eyes and tell me everything. You owe me that much." The message was simple but sharp. Ethan would come over, and when he did, Karen would make sure he understood the depth of her pain. She was going to confront him, not just about Sophie, but about everything. She would demand the answers he owed her, and she would make sure he knew that she wasn't some passive, broken woman anymore. She was stronger now, or at least she would pretend to be. She tossed the phone onto the coffee table and stood up, pacing around the apartment. Her hands were shaking, her chest tight with anticipation. What was she going to do when he arrived? What if he didn't come? What if he didn't care anymore? But the thought of him not showing up only fueled her determination. She didn't need him to care. She needed him to face the consequences of his actions. Voiceover: "I've been weak long enough. No more. I'll make him feel everything I've felt, the betrayal, the emptiness. I'll make him regret choosing her over me. And once he understands that, maybe I can finally start to heal." The hours stretched on, and Karen found herself getting more anxious with each passing minute. Her thoughts were no longer centered around whether or not Ethan would show up. No, now, it was about what she would do when he did. The power dynamic had shifted. She no longer cared whether he wanted her back. The only thing that mattered was making sure he felt the weight of his actions, the weight of losing her. She glanced at the clock again. Time was running out. Ethan would be here soon. And when he did, Karen would make sure he never forgot the woman he had discarded. She would leave him with a memory that would haunt him forever. And in that moment, she would finally have control. The night felt heavy, suffocating even, as Karen stood in the center of the living room. Every corner of the apartment, once filled with laughter and the warmth of shared moments, now felt like a tomb, silent, cold, and void of everything that had once been. The apartment's familiar surroundings only heightened her sense of isolation. This wasn't the place of their dreams, the place of love. No, this was the place where her heart had been shattered beyond repair. The doorbell rang. Karen froze for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. It was him. Ethan had come. Despite everything, despite her anger, despite the chaos swirling inside her, she knew this moment had arrived. This confrontation, this reckoning, had been building for days, for weeks even, and now it was about to explode into something irreversible. Her pulse raced as she stood there, frozen for a moment. What was she going to do? The last few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, and now the storm inside her was finally reaching its peak. She had been consumed by the need to confront him, to make him understand the depth of her pain. But now, standing in the quiet of their home, she felt the weight of what was about to happen. Her emotions were no longer just about pain, they had morphed into something darker, something more dangerous. Karen's hands trembled as she walked toward the door. She could hear Ethan's voice on the other side, muffled but recognizable. "Ethan, from outside, Karen, I'm here. Please, just let me in. We need to talk." But there was no more talking to do. The words had already been spoken. The truth had been laid bare, and now all that was left was action, action that would change everything. Karen opened the door slowly, the creaking sound of the hinges cutting through the silence like a warning. When she saw him standing there, his face drawn with guilt, his eyes full of uncertainty, something inside her shifted. This wasn't the Ethan she had known. This wasn't the man she had loved. The man who had so easily abandoned her for someone else. Karen's gaze was cold, her eyes hard, betraying none of the vulnerability that had once been so apparent. Ethan stepped inside hesitantly, his eyes flicking nervously to her face. She didn't move. She didn't invite him in, didn't offer any comfort. She simply stood there, watching him, waiting. "Karen," low, controlled, "you came. But what do you think we're going to talk about, Ethan? You think there's anything left to say?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his face a mixture of regret and nervousness. He opened his mouth to speak, but Karen held up her hand, stopping him. "Karen, don't. I don't want your excuses anymore." The anger in her voice was unmistakable, and it made Ethan flinch. He took a step back, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the right words. But there were no right words. Not anymore. There was only the aftermath of his betrayal. "Ethan," softly, "I never wanted to hurt you, Karen. I never meant for this to happen. Please, just understand." Karen, cutting him off, "Understand? You want me to understand that you've been lying to me for months, that you've been cheating on me, that you've discarded everything we had like it was nothing? That's what you want me to understand?" Her voice was rising now, each word sharp, every sentence cutting deeper than the last. Her emotions, which had been building up for days, now spilled over in an uncontrollable torrent. Ethan stepped forward, trying to reach for her hand, as if he could somehow console her, as if he could undo the damage he had caused. Ethan, pleading, Karen, please, I know I've hurt you. I'm so sorry, but we can fix this. We can work through this. But Karen wasn't listening anymore. She wasn't the woman who had once believed in second chances, in reconciliation. No, she had been broken, and something inside her had snapped. There was no coming back from this. No fixing it. Karen, coldly, no. You don't get to fix this. You don't get to come here and pretend like everything's fine. You walked away from me. You chose her. And now, you'll feel what it's like to be discarded. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his face going pale as he realized the depth of her anger. For the first time, Karen saw fear in his eyes. He took a step back, his hands raised as if trying to calm her down. Ethan, Karen, stop. You're scaring me. But Karen wasn't scared anymore. She wasn't afraid of losing him, she had already lost him. Now, it was his turn to feel the same emptiness that had consumed her. She walked slowly toward the kitchen, her footsteps deliberate, the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Ethan followed her, his voice now desperate, trying to reason with her, but Karen had made up her mind. She had to make him understand the cost of his betrayal. She opened the drawer where she had placed it earlier, the small, cold object that had been sitting there, waiting. The knife. She didn't hesitate. Her hand wrapped around the handle, the cool metal sending a shiver up her spine. The sensation was strange, not fear, not excitement, but something else. Something darker. She turned around, holding the knife in her hand, the blade gleaming under the kitchen lights. Karen, quietly, but with a deadly calm, you think you can just walk away from me? You think you can leave me like this, shattered and alone? No, Ethan. You don't get to just leave. Not without consequences. Ethan's eyes widened in horror as he saw the knife in her hand. He took another step back, his voice trembling. Ethan, frantic, Karen, please. Don't do this. I never meant for any of this to happen. Karen, smiling coldly, you didn't mean for it to happen? Well, I didn't mean for any of this either. But here we are, and now you'll feel it. She took a step closer to him, and his eyes darted to the door, but he knew he wouldn't make it. He was trapped, and there was nowhere to run from the storm Karen had become. Ethan, Karen, please, I'm begging you. We can fix this. Just let me explain. Let me, but before he could finish, Karen lunged forward. It happened so fast that Ethan didn't have time to react. His gasp of shock was cut short as Karen shoved the knife into his side. There was a moment of stillness. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Voiceover, and just like that, love turned to hate. Ethan staggered back, his hand clutching at the wound, his face paling. His breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to stay upright, but his legs gave way. He collapsed to the floor, groaning in pain, his vision blurred. Karen stood over him, the knife still gripped tightly in her hand, her face emotionless. Ethan, weakly, Karen, please, don't. I love you, but Karen didn't hear him. She didn't care. The love she had once felt for him was gone, replaced by something far darker, a need for revenge, for justice, for closure. The man she had loved was no more. And now, all that remained was the emptiness, the bitter satisfaction of knowing that he would never hurt her again. Ethan's breathing slowed, his body trembling as he lay on the floor, blood pooling around him. Karen watched him, her expression unreadable. She had no tears left to cry. No emotions left to feel. Only cold, unyielding silence. The room was still, the only sound the slow, labored breaths of a man who had lost everything, his life, his love, his future. And Karen? She stood there, the knife still in her hand, watching as his life drained away. The room was eerily quiet. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the faucet, echoing in the stillness. Karen stood in the middle of the living room, her body stiff, her mind numb. The knife was still in her hand, its blade gleaming in the dim light as if mocking her. She hadn't expected it to happen this way, but now, standing over Ethan's lifeless body, she was unsure of anything anymore, of what had driven her, of what had caused her to snap, of what she had become. Ethan lay on the floor, his body still, blood pooling around him, staining the carpet in deep crimson. Karen's eyes traced the bloody trail, and for a moment, she felt nothing. The anger, the rage that had propelled her forward moments ago had vanished, replaced by a profound emptiness. She stared at the scene before her, as if trying to comprehend what had just happened, but the more she looked, the less she understood. How had it come to this? How had she ended up here, standing over the man she once loved, her heart now as cold as the blade in her hand? Voiceover, in the silence, Karen realized that what she did was irreversible. But was it truly love that caused this? Or something darker? Karen dropped to her knees beside Ethan's body, the knife slipping from her hand and clattering against the floor. She placed her trembling hands on the floor, trying to steady herself, but her body wouldn't stop shaking. The reality of what she had done slowly began to creep in, and a wave of nausea hit her. She reached for her stomach, but there was no comfort to be found. She could feel the bile rising in her throat, the overwhelming sense of wrongness in everything she had just done. But still, she couldn't cry. She couldn't feel. The numbness had overtaken her completely. Karen stumbled to her feet, her mind spiraling into chaos. She wasn't sure where to begin. What was she supposed to do now? What could she do? She had killed him. There was no turning back, no undoing it. It wasn't a moment of self-defense or rage that had overcome her, it was calculated. She had planned it, even if she hadn't fully realized it at the time. The moment he stepped into the apartment, she knew what she was going to do. And now, here she was, alone in the aftermath, with nothing left but the remnants of a life she had destroyed. Her eyes scanned the apartment, her gaze falling on the blood-stained carpet where Ethan had collapsed. The overwhelming reality of what she had done began to seep into her consciousness. How could she have let it go this far? How could she have let herself become this person, capable of such violence? She had always been the one who believed in love, in second chances, in forgiveness. But now, she was a killer. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. She wasn't sure if she even knew herself. She staggered toward the kitchen, trying to steady herself, but her legs felt like lead. Her hands were still trembling, and she wiped them against her clothes, trying to rid herself of the feeling of blood that seemed to cling to her. Her movements were mechanical, detached, as if she were functioning on autopilot. She grabbed a towel, dampened it with water, and returned to the living room. She kneeled down, her eyes locked on Ethan's body, but it was as if she were seeing it through a fog. She wasn't really there, not fully. She wiped at the bloodstains, but the red only seemed to spread further, mocking her feeble attempts to clean it away. Her breaths came in shallow gasps as she tried to make sense of the situation, but there was no sense to be found. She had taken the life of the man she once loved. She had killed him. And yet, it felt so surreal, as if it were happening to someone else. This wasn't her. She wasn't a killer. She had never imagined that she would do something like this. She had always thought that love should be enough to hold things together, to make everything right again. But now, all she had was an irreversible act of violence, an empty apartment, and the haunting realization that there was no going back. She looked back down at Ethan's body, her throat tight, her chest constricting with the weight of the moment. For the first time, her tears finally began to fall, but they weren't the tears of a woman who had lost love. They were the tears of someone who had just crossed an irreparable line. Her heart pounded in her chest as her emotions churned. She had wanted to make Ethan feel the pain he had caused her. She had wanted him to understand what it felt like to be abandoned, to be betrayed, to have your heart torn apart. But now, the anger was gone. The need for revenge was gone. All that remained was the crushing weight of guilt and confusion. Voiceover: was it love that drove her to this point, or was it something darker, something deeper, that had consumed her? Had she truly been in control, or had the pain of betrayal and heartbreak twisted her into someone she no longer recognized? She staggered to the door and opened it, stepping outside into the cold night air. The world outside was dark, silent, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded within those walls. Karen stood on the porch, her breath visible in the chilly air, but she didn't feel the cold. She didn't feel anything. Her mind was a blank slate, her thoughts spinning in a million directions, but none of them seemed to make sense. What had she done? What now? The decision to call the police had been made in an instant, but even as she reached for her phone, she hesitated. What was she going to say? What could she say that would explain this? That would explain the events that had unfolded in this very apartment? She couldn't tell them the truth. She couldn't admit what she had done, the brutal reality of her actions, the cold, calculated way in which she had taken Ethan's life. For a moment, the idea of running away, of escaping, of leaving everything behind, seemed tempting. But where would she go? How could she run from the one thing that would haunt her for the rest of her life? She couldn't run from herself. She stepped back inside, her heart heavy with the weight of her decisions. Her mind raced, but her body felt like it was moving in slow motion. She knew she had to face the consequences. She couldn't keep running from them. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. But what was left? What was left after everything had been destroyed? The apartment seemed even emptier now, a hollow shell of what it once was. Karen sank to the floor, her back against the wall, staring blankly at the space around her. Everything felt detached, as if she were watching herself from a distance. The woman who had stood in this very spot just hours ago, filled with love and hope for a future with Ethan, was gone. And in her place was someone who had committed an unforgivable act, someone who had lost everything. Voiceover: and in that moment, Karen understood. Love had not caused this. It wasn't love that drove her to this point. It was the pain, the rage, the betrayal, it was everything she couldn't control, everything she couldn't fix. And now, she was left with nothing. Nothing but the weight of what she had done. Karen closed her eyes, her hands pressed against her forehead, trying to block out the images of Ethan's lifeless body, trying to block out the truth. But the truth was inescapable. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The silence enveloped her as she sat there, paralyzed by her actions, unsure of what the future held, but certain of one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The air was still, the sky a muted gray, and the earth beneath her feet felt colder than it ever had before. Karen stood at the foot of Ethan's grave, her eyes locked on the simple headstone that marked the end of a life she had once shared, a life she had once loved. The weight of everything, the love, the pain, the betrayal, and ultimately, the destruction she had caused, pressed down on her like a suffocating blanket. She had never imagined this would be the outcome, never imagined that the love she had fought for would end in this cold, final way. The cemetery was quiet, save for the faint sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. It was the kind of quiet that made everything feel more real, more permanent. Karen's breath formed small clouds in the air as she exhaled slowly, her gaze never leaving the grave in front of her. The morning sun, weak and cold, filtered through the clouds, casting a pale, eerie light over the scene. Karen had come here for a reason: to say goodbye, to confront the reality of what she had done, to reflect on the choices she had made. But standing here, in front of Ethan's grave, she realized there was nothing left to say. The words of apology, of sorrow, of regret, they were meaningless now. Nothing she could say would bring him back. Nothing she could say would undo the violence she had wrought. And yet, somehow, her lips still parted as if searching for the words she knew would never come. Voiceover: Valentine's Day, a day that should have been for love, but for Karen, it became a reminder of a choice that could never be undone. Karen knelt beside the grave, her hands resting lightly on the cool ground, her fingers brushing against the soil. She didn't know what she expected to feel, but the emptiness that filled her was all-consuming. It wasn't the emptiness of loss, that much she could understand. It was the emptiness of knowing that she had taken the life of the man she had once cared for. The man who had been her future. The man who had broken her heart. Her mind raced, memories of their time together flashing before her eyes. The trips they had taken, the laughter they had shared, the promises they had made, all of it now seemed so distant, like a lifetime ago. What had happened? How had it come to this? She had been so sure of everything, so sure of their love, of their future together. And then, just like that, everything had unraveled. The love she had once felt had twisted into something darker, something vengeful. And now, standing in front of Ethan's grave, she saw the full cost of that vengeance. Voiceover: you can't love someone more than someone else and think it won't destroy them. Karen learned that too late. The finality of the words rang in her ears, the truth settling deep inside her. She had thought she was justified in her actions, that the pain of being betrayed was enough to excuse what she had done. But now, in the quiet of the cemetery, she understood. There was no justification. There was no excuse. The love she had felt for Ethan, the love that had once been pure, had become tainted by anger, by betrayal, and by the desperate need for control. And in that desperation, she had lost herself. She had destroyed the man she had once loved, and in doing so, she had destroyed any chance of redemption, of healing. The silence of the graveyard seemed to press in on her, suffocating her in its weight. She looked down at the grave once more, her eyes vacant, distant. She had no tears left to shed. No more anger, no more hatred. Only a deep, suffocating emptiness that filled every part of her being. Karen slowly stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. She didn't look back at the grave. She couldn't. She had made her choice, and now, there was no turning back. The world around her seemed muted, as if everything had lost its color, its meaning. She took a few tentative steps away from the grave, her steps slow, deliberate, but empty. She wasn't walking away from the grave, she was walking away from the life she had once known, from the love she had once cherished, from the person she had once been. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to keep walking. Keep moving forward, even if she didn't know what lay ahead. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet cemetery, each one a reminder of the life she had taken, the love she had lost. She could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her chest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. As she walked away, Karen's mind remained fixated on one simple truth. There was no going back. The choice had been made, and it had irrevocably changed her, changed everything. She had crossed a line, and now she was left with the consequences of her actions. The world continued on around her, but she was no longer a part of it. She was a ghost, drifting through the ruins of the life she had destroyed. And as she disappeared into the distance, one thing was clear: she would never be the same again. The silence of the graveyard enveloped her, and with it, the haunting realization that she could never undo what she had done, and that perhaps, she was never meant to.